Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar, How to Avoid TEM Implementation Epic Failures. Before we get started, I would like to cover a few items. Audio controls have been disabled for attendees during the webinar. However, we do encourage attendee participation. Please utilize the chat functionality to ask questions during the webinar. Depending on your question, it will either be addressed in real time or at the conclusion of today's event. Now, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce Cheryl Altani, Senior Vice President of Global Services, and Scott Levy, Vice President of Enterprise Client Development.
Thanks, guys. Good morning. Good afternoon, I guess, at this point for us here in Indianapolis. We're going to get started with our conference for our webinar for today. So without further ado, a little bit about who we are, Cheryl.
Hi. Welcome. I'm really glad you joined us today. We are really an information services company focused on telecommunications, and we work across industries with large enterprises, with vendors, and the public sector. And we maintain high-performance, efficient, fixed and mobile telecommunication environments. So our objective is to make our clients' environments more effective. We utilize our proprietary Efficiency First framework, which is a disciplined and best practice-driven approach in managing those telecommunication environments and assessing them and working with our clients so you can realize great gains in efficiency, productivity, and performance while you're reducing costs.
All right, so let's get right into it. Why TEM? Expectations and what is the reality? So we want to take you through in the next few slides. I want to help give you an understanding of, when you say TEM, what does it mean? So what's expected from a TEM provider? Negotiations, asset management, dispute resolution. I mean, it's a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people, right? I mean, and as we look at this, what was your expectation when you were deploying TEM? You have a TEM, you're moving away from it. What did you feel that you were going to get, and how are you going into this? So I want to try to get us to the point by the end of the session today that we understand why we went into a TEM initiative, what we should have expectations from it, and what we're going to do about it. So let's get into the next piece. Who is TEM to you? So telecom expense management, telecommunications expense management, or TEM tools. Fixed management, mobile. Invoice processing through software, either hosted or installed. Telecommunications environment management. What is TEM to you? As we look at it, and from a definition standpoint, TEM to me today is defined as telecommunications invoice processing through software, either hosted or installed. It's a tool. It's a piece of technology to help you manage and process invoices, no more, no less, when we're talking about TEM tools. If we're going to talk about telecom environment management, we're looking holistically. People, process, tools, technology, services, and costs. So as we go through today, we want to define for you, what does it mean? What did I expect against what I got? What's sold? So for those of you who have been looking into TEM or have TEM initiatives, what was sold? And if you have TEM, this is for you. Audit savings, were you sold on immediate gratification, if you will, immediate wins to an audit? Correct billing and management of chargeback controls. Did you want the chargebacks? Is that something you were looking for? 10 to 20% savings annually. That's kind of a misnomer from a TEM standpoint. If someone's saving 10 to 20% annually, that probably means that there's some breakage, right? Inventory. Were you sold on an inventory? You're going to know every service, every line, where it's at, what it is. Ability to reduce headcount. How many people anticipated that if I deploy TEM, technology to help me process invoices, I could reduce my headcount? How many people thought that there was going to be ease of use and reporting, whereas actuality, you might have to add headcount to manage the technology, to manage what's going on? Easy implementation. How many people deployed a TEM technology and heard from the vendor, this is going to be easy. This is not going to take any of your time, no effort, it's going to be a piece of cake. Little effort on the end user's part. What was the expectation about how much effort you were going to have to put into it to effectively deploy TEM within your organization? Were anybody on the conference call today sold on those expectations that this was going to be just as easy as it could be and make a tremendous impact on the organization from a savings standpoint? I'd be interested in your feedback. Sure.
Well, and how many people right now are either laughing or grimacing that indeed that was their expectation, and then reality hit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we're having this discussion today. So we start aligning realistic expectations on the partnership you have to have in a TEM installation.
And for me, having spent many years, in the space, just from a telecom expense and environment management standpoint, evaluating tools, these are the things that I hear from people every day. This is what I expected. This is what I was sold, and this is why we went down that road. So align these with what you have heard or are hearing. And then before we're done today, we'll tell you what of it is real and maybe what is a bit stretched.
And also to the point, I know some of you are thinking, wow, that's a long list. This is a more comprehensive list. And my belief is that you probably have experienced one or two or three of them. If you've experienced all of them, that is a real disaster, but most people have not.
Right, and the audit piece, the thing I'll say while we're here is that on the audit portion, many people, that's what excites them most about the opportunity for savings. And I'll get more into that in a moment, but the reality of it is that 10 to 20% annually, if you're sold on 10 to 20% annual savings from a TEM provider, that means it's going to be perpetually broken. Because if you can't better your environment and streamline it through the use of TEM, you're not getting any value to begin with. So those are things we'll come back into in a moment. What's delivered? So what's sold versus what's delivered? So now we're going to give you some of the definitions, and Cheryl and I are going to kind of go back and forth. But the audit, that's what gets people excited. If we deploy, we're going to initially save X and Y. Well, the audit, truly, the reality of it is it's performed by people, not technology. Very little root cause analysis to the issues found. What does that mean? That means that there's a bill audit done by somebody in that organization, that TEM provider. They're going to find issues, anomalies, contract issues, and those things initially through human intervention, not through the software. And so many people make an assessment about how good they've got it by the audit savings initially, which really has little, if anything, to do with the capabilities of the software long term. So audit is a bit of a misnomer and savings.
Right, and then you go into billing. So are you really managing your billing, or have you dumped the invoices directly into the software from your service providers? So once you do the audit, how valuable is that? Are you aligning what you pay to what you should be paying to your services? Are you aligning it to the contract? So you may be delivering a billing payment function, but how accurate is it is the issue. And the accuracy is not the TEM issue. Because like any piece of software, if you put good data in, you get good results. And if you get garbage in, you get garbage out.
Right, and the thing to that is, the thing I would ask or question all of you that are on the call today is, have you ever found a phone bill with a problem? And if you've ever found a phone problem, and here's the thing about billing, reality from the carrier, you'll never find a problem until you look at it. And so that said, if I'm going to dump information electronically from the vendor into software, what's the validity of that? And the reality is little, if any. The 10 to 20% annual savings, I put in here, if this is happening, it's broken. If every year you can find 10 to 20% wrong in billing, you're not fixing the root cause of the issue. There's no resolution. So do you have a TEM that's a partner, or do you have a TEM provider that's simply processing your invoices? I would argue that there are providers out there that become partners with their clients to help them optimize, make an impact to their environment, not just process an invoice to do a chargeback. And processing doesn't necessarily mean, there's a lot of things to ask about what processing means.
Right, and to that point, a lot of that is dependent upon how engaged you are as the enterprise, as the buyer of these services, because if the TEM provider does not have correct data, if you don't invest in as we move down, the inventory, if it isn't accurate and you don't have the buy-in of your executives, it does become a tool that is not used effectively. It's used to pay bills.
Right. Right. And so then, we get into inventory and headcount. So, on an inventory standpoint, my question to everybody was, is billing accurate? If it's accurate, then that's one thing. If not, which is standardly the case, is there a valid inventory? Many TEM providers, this again is a misnomer in many TEM initiatives that I find, is that there was an assumption or a selling of, you will have an inventory. I want to know an inventory of what? Circuits, lines, accounts. An account level representation of my inventory tells me little, if anything. What's in it, what's the sub-accounts, what are the BTNs, the WTNs. I want to know everything down to the line. If I'm going to have an inventory, I need to know what it is, where it is, and what I'm paying for it. And if I don't, all I have is an accounting of the costs, and the costs don't align with the inventory. You can only create inventory when 4 things happen. You bring bills, contracts, the CSRs, and line verification. Until those 4 things can happen, you do not have a valid, solid inventory. I do the line verification. I physically dial my voice lines to make sure they're live, find my disconnects, so I can't be complete. I use the CSRs to tie to the bills and to the contracts to make sure that everything's live. That ultimately is the holy grail. So I can't tell you how important this piece is, because I find so many times over the years that there was an assumption made that we have an inventory in our TEM technology. And then when they actually had to drill down into a service, something that was out or down, they couldn't find it because it didn't exist. It was account level information. It wasn't line level. So I caution that across the board strongly. And I also caution the thought that I can reduce headcount by deploying TEM technology, because that many times is not the case. The technology may be more robust than the current team, and so the ability to manage it is not what you'd like, and or there are so many issues and defaults that you got to deal with from what you need to do your work to keep information in it, that you may find yourself needing more. I have organizations who have dumped headcount by 30 to 40% and regretted it within 60 days post, and either have to hire back or just do with less, which all of us in telecommunications understand how to go about that. Sure.
Right, and when you look at headcount and really resource skills, do you have a continuous life cycle program? Once you have that valid inventory, Scott, which is really important, how do you maintain it? You don't want to do that all the time. You want to make sure that when you do your move, add, changes, deletes, all of those connects, all of those things, they are tracked accurately, and that there is an ongoing program of sample validation to make sure your system is always kept current. So reducing headcount, changing headcount might be a better kind. Some skills may have to be changed, or you probably have people that can do other things and would enjoy the new challenges as well. Mm-hmm. And then moving to technology, my question, Scott, is ease of use by who, for what, by whom. It's only as good as the processes and the alignment to business objectives. Mm-hmm. Technology is just going to sit there and do whatever it does unless you structure it in your specific need.
Right, right. And I think that's something that really heads up of what were the expectations, what were the outcomes. I mean, the easy implementation, that's an expectation. That's a sales tool more than a reality. Virtually never is there easy implementation. Technology implementations, like you said here, by their definition, are complex. The people, the processes, and the tool. I can't tell you and stress enough when we think about implementation. Implementation needs to be predicated on your people, your processes, your technology, your services. If it's not aligned with your organization and you get a big playbook and says this is how you'll work with us, you need to have a deeper conversation, because what you find yourselves doing is perpetually spending time in implementation. We're going to show you a very interesting statistic here, probably I think in the next slide, about steady state. Steady state, just kind of leading into it, steady state is the time in which you contract that your technology, once installed, will be up and running, billing will be being processed, and it's doing what it's expected to do. So implementation, virtually never is it what was expected. Virtually never is it easy. It doesn't mean that it's impossible, but setting poor expectations with your team, with their team, and across the board really sets you up for unrealistic, which is the last statement on this page, unrealistic ideas about the amount of effort that will be involved. It is an undertaking to modify the way you manage and process costs. That said, if you can't modify and change processes around it, its ability to work is very difficult. And considering TEM as a tool, I would say the easiest way to look at it is to align your people and your processes with your tool to have a more effective outcome.
And even if you use it, you buy the software, if you have a managed service, if it's SaaS, if it's totally outsourced, you have to package what you want to go into the system and what you want to come out, no matter how it's delivered.
Yes.
So some has more headcount, some has less, but no matter what, it has to be integrated into your business environment.
So here's an interesting statistic, Cheryl.
Of all the TEM deployments that are out there, they're often delayed and extended, and you can see the numbers that almost half of all TEM deployments are delayed an average of 8 months. That's an average, so you can imagine some of those were up in double digits and maybe high double digits, and 7% are less than expected, so we'll try to find out who those were. I would assume they are not global nor extremely complex. 44 about the same, so I would suggest are on a project plan, have an integrated team that's putting it in, and have great expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing to think about is that, I mean, you have a 50-50 chance of getting it right. So if there are not good expectations set, if you're not on the same page, then you can anticipate that you're going to be closer to that extension and the missing of the steady state. So very, very crucial to set expectations up front.
And we have a question on why do TEM providers want to be paid upon signing a contract when it often takes 3 to 6 months to get the TEM service up and running. Well, from a business perspective, I'd almost turn that around. The heaviest load should be the implementation. The heaviest expense for the TEM provider is making sure all your invoices can be paid correctly, that your inventory is accurate and validated. That is an extremely high cost. So getting everything up and running is very high, and then it goes into more of a steady state run, but as we can see here, only half ever reach that.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about, I mean, a TEM initiative, if a TEM provider had a prime initiative, it would be to get your information in the system as quickly as possible to bill you monthly. So implementation takes on quite a bit of effort on both sides. There becomes frustrations on both sides, and we can certainly talk about more of that offline. But setting the expectations up front, what you're going to get, how you're going to get, and we're going to get into that more in a moment, will really set you up for more success. Let's get to another statistic here real quickly.
So enterprises repeatedly employ multiple suppliers over a TEM project lifetime. So that's during a TEM project. So you start with one, 50% start with one, 33% go and get their second, another 10% their third, 7% go more than 4. We have real clients who are on their 6th and 7th TEM provider. And the discussions we have are not exactly easy because we have to say, what is really broken? Is your inventory not correct? Are your bills not being paid on time? Do you not have a good handle on your processes? Is there a lot of manual translation because your environment does not match the software? What can you do as an enterprise to change your environment to get your enterprise and business unit leaders to understand how this can benefit them in order to make that TEM tool work? Scott?
No, I mean that's all very relevant. I mean, the reality of it is, you know, in my function in the organization, I get to spend a lot of time with companies. Many of you that are on this call, I'm sure I've chatted with over time, and one of my specialties is telecom expense and environment management and globalization, and I can't tell you how many people are frustrated, and those that are on their 4th, 5th, and 6th technology, they continued in many situations to put the blame on the TEM. Sometimes there's a need to look in the mirror as well because the people and the processes aren't aligned, and so therefore the technology has a hard time working. So we're going to try to vet some of that out in some of these following slides, but the reality of it is you have to align yourself with the technology you're going to deploy in the organization across multiple pieces. And I just can't tell you how important that is because you'll become frustrated like a lot of other people that they're not getting what they expected and they need to find another one to fix it, and that won't necessarily be the case.
So we have a really interesting question from Ed Garner, who's asked, realizing the focus is on TEM, to what extent would we say that best practice is to use your TEM provider for a WEM opportunity if they have that skill, or is the knowledge and expectation of WEM so different that it makes sense to keep them separate?
I think it's a good question. I mean, from a TEM and WEM standpoint, I mean, there are two distinctly different service offerings from a TEM provider and a WEM provider. I mean, we've always tied TEM to fixed communications. WIM, primarily mobility. It's just like the MDM providers. There's a lot of niche plays coming into the space now, the MDM providers versus the WIM provider. You know, there's a lot of confusion. What does that mean? Well, MDM is providing more of the deployment and management of security and things that effect, where WIM is processing invoices, is help desk, is break fix. Are there vendors that do both successfully? Absolutely. Are there better WIM providers and better TEM providers? Absolutely. You really need to look at the corporate initiative and what it is you're trying to achieve. I will say that obviously the fewer vendors I have to work with, the better off I am. But if I'm going to go global, let's talk about North America. If I'm going to go North America, you have a cornucopia of vendors that you can work with. If I'm going to go global, it cuts down to 10 or less, period. And so the reality of it is you need to look at what is the expectation, how is the staff set up to be able to engage and manage on a long-term basis, and whether I'm going to go with one to do both or one for each is dependent on my corporate need across the board, and you have to go at it from that point first. Don't go from the sales pitch, don't go from the savings, don't go from how easy it is. What is my corporate initiative, what is the need, and what's the outcome I'm looking to achieve?
And have people help you, who, no matter who they are, whether they're internal, external, read the reports, read the studies, and look for people who really understand the future. If your company is going to BYOD, it's not a savings, right? But that's an expertise. There's security issues. Find your requirements as an enterprise and people who address those specific ones.
Yeah.
That's more important than whether you have one or two or three.
And the last thing I'll add to that is think about it strategically, not tactically. This needs to go outside of the department and look at strategically for the organization, how's it going to impact me? And we'll get more into that in a moment. So you want to cover this next slide here, Cheryl?
Sure. So why do organizations cancel the TEM-WIM projects? A lot of them are performance issues, and they did the one-time audit. They got their 20%. They dropped it because the implementation was too hard. The expectations weren't right on either side, and they didn't have the partnership. They decided to bring the program in-house. Again, we did the audit. We got your help. Thank you very much. We don't have a lot of invoices we found. We have a clean inventory. We can do it ourselves. Sometimes the project's just oversold and there's an under-delivery. Often happens on global programs. If you're global, get an expert. Get someone to do a program plan with you on how to roll out global. It is not the same. And if someone ever tells you you do it big bang, you do all the countries at once, talk to someone else.
Run.
Yeah, run and find someone who says, no, that's really not right. Unless you have two countries. You know, I'm talking about a true global rollout. And then internal resources, we're spending just too much time on the project and we weren't getting the payback. Again, if you look under the covers of that, there's going to be a lot of process issues, expectation issues, and the lack of senior executives sponsoring this as a corporate initiative.
And that's going to be one of the things, that last one you're going to see, that's going to be when you were sold on the savings. That's when you're going to get really upset, is if TEM's doing its job, you have declining savings over time. You should look to become 2%, no more than 2% inefficient. So if every year they're finding 20%, that's just not a good relationship at all. Number 1 and number 3 are primarily the two things that go together that we find the most. Performance issues as well as oversold. I'm not getting what I expected, I'm paying too much for it, and it's just not doing what I wanted. So let's go on to why are there roadblocks. These are some of my favorites because this is going to give you some things to think about. My point to these would be look in the mirror and see if any of these apply to you. So let's first talk about is there pre-implementation enterprise understanding. So before you implement TEM, you should be asking yourself these 4 questions. Number 1, is there a solid and accurate view to my telecom services inventory? Do you have visibility to your services? Everything that's coming to the demarc. I don't care about what's in the closet, but let's just talk about demarcation. Let's talk about all the wireless devices. Do you know who has it, where is it, what I'm paying for it? Visibility to inventory is very key. You can't manage what you can't measure. It's one of my favorite statements, and I say it all the time. Is the environment optimized? So if I've got a good solid inventory, I now have the ability to optimize my environment, clean it up, get rid of waste, even aggregate some billing, consolidate local carriers that I may have 3 where I could have 1. So have I optimized my environment? Are there processes and procedures in place to maintain consistency? Do I have processes? Do I have procedures? Are people following those? And then step 4 is, are you measuring those processes? Are you measuring the performance? So 4 steps, and I call this my telecom nirvana. Telecom nirvana is doing 4 things: building an inventory, optimizing your environment, cleaning it up. And by the way, the more you do that, the less you'll have cost per TEM, because it's based on invoices and sites and carriers. Am I and have I deployed processes, and am I measuring them? What do you think step 5 is? Step 5 is TEM or WEM. I can't tell you how many times I get into the organizations and I have discussions and I take them through this and I find out step 1 was deployment of TEM because they didn't have visibility, they hadn't optimized, there was no processes, and they were not measuring. I'm going to bring in TEM because it's magic and it's going to fix all my problems. And there was an immediate disappointment that that wasn't going to happen, because what's TEM's responsibility? To process invoices through software either hosted or installed, period. That's its core responsibility. That's what it does. It's all the ancillary services that they can wrap around it: help desk, reconciliation, contracts management. But the reality of it is the core of TEM is invoice processing through software. If you haven't put your world in order, and if you're looking today and shaking your head because you're on your TEM engagement and you're realizing you're having problems, you can probably default to one of these 4 things that wasn't done ahead of time. And so then you find that maybe you weren't as prepared as you thought.
Yes, when we're talking to clients, we often talk about the 5th step of standing on your head and finding out that's the only way, that it's the first way to do it.
Right.
So putting software in place, it's the same thing. Would you put any software in place without understanding how it's going to align to your processes or how your people use it?
Exactly, exactly. So let's go on and identify and prioritize some expectations. So, these are some things that we want to just cover off on as you're setting expectations. What are you setting expectations to do? Because TEM is going to be part of your world. So workflow. Are you looking to automate? The bottom line is automating a bad program just means you do bad things faster, right? So am I automating a good process or a bad process? Or as Cheryl would say, process. System reduction and elimination and efficiencies. What am I looking to gain from workflow as a byproduct of utilizing a TEM technology? Really think about that. What fits? What does it do? How does it do it? And what am I going to get out of it? Auditing. Invoice to contract compliance, invoice to inventory compliance, dispute management. What is it that you're looking to get from the auditing process? What is done in and out of the technology? Again, a very, very important question. You tell me you're going to do auditing. How are you going to do it? Inside the technology, outside the technology, and you want to know that. Optimization. This boils down to partnering. Am I going to work with a TEM provider that's going to look at my service to cost performance, fixed and mobile service capacity issue resolution? Are you going to look to help me optimize my environment, or are you simply going to process my invoices on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Change control. What are your expectations here? Reconcile change events in TEM to maintain financial, operational, and technical efficiency. Are you going to do my change controls? Are you going to manage it? I want you to do it. I don't want you to do it. I'm going to do it. Regardless, again, setting these expectations should take most of the effort, just like developing software. You spend 75% up front in development, then it takes 25% time to get it done. If you do the reverse, disaster occurs. Contracts management, what do you want them to do? Track and manage terms, conditions, service levels. Asset service management, help desk management. I'm going to read through every one of these, but in these expectations, is this deck going to be available?
Yeah.
So everybody will have availability to this deck. So these things that are here, I mean, if you're scribbling notes, you'll have access to this deck. But these are things, if I'm setting expectations, I want to know full well what those are, and I want my vendor to know what they are. We need to agree on that.
And another question was asked about provisioning and how provisioning fits in with this on top of invoice processing. I'll start, and Scott's much more knowledgeable. But from a provisioning viewpoint, even more do you have to be integrated, because your vendors have to be approved. They have to be in your system for that service. It has to be pulled down in a logical way. The rules and regulations and procedures you put in place have to be followed. So I can't walk down the hall and go to Ashley and say, Ashley, I know there's a 3-week wait, but I really need this. Can I get it tomorrow? You have to be very almost draconian to make sure it fits in the processes and aligns to your contracts. What I've seen so many times is people use the TEM for provisioning without the planning, and it becomes almost a free-for-all, that there's more being provisioned outside of the system than inside the system. Scott?
No, I think that's perfect. And a lot of times, IT. I mean, everybody for the most part in telecommunications falls today under IT, but there's still those road warriors out there that'll do their own things. I set up a system, I set up a provisioning template, a model, and they don't follow it. So it's very, very, very important if there's a TEM technology involved and you are using them for provisioning, either their portal on through to the vendor and or direct to the vendor. You've got to tie that provisioning piece to the TEM, because if it doesn't keep track of what's going on, then you'll have problems. And we find that right now we're involved in helping an organization with the TEM deployment. We're the PMO. So we're sitting on top, working both for the client as well as the TEM. And neither side has a good provisioning model. So there's things being done and added to the system, and billing's not getting into the TEM technology. That's problematic today because we know it's happened. It's going to be even more problematic in 2 months when they start disconnecting lines because the bill's not getting paid. So just think about that provisioning. What do you want them to do? What are you going to do? Most people tend to do a pass through the technology in their portal to make provisioning happen, but they still maintain control of it.
And it becomes not only a process discussion, but an integration discussion. And you really have to talk to your provider. Do they have integration with other systems, meaning a CBS file that's sent at night or a batch file? Mm-hmm. Or do you have two-way integration with your HR systems, with your Ariba or your purchasing systems? And that's an entirely different investment, because telecommunications is technology, remember. So these are technological systems that need to talk to each other if that's what you want.
So these are questions, this particular line of questioning are questions for you to use with your vendor. When you sit across from your vendor, they're going to tell you, oh, yes, I can do that, or I'm working on that, or whatever. You never buy TEM from a speculative manner. If you have something in Germany that you want to manage and the vendor tells you, well, we're working on that and we'll get around to it, go find somebody else. Never buy TEM based on speculation. But here's some questions that you need to utilize with your vendor and be talking about. Scope of services experience. What is the scope of their experience? With whom, on what kind of landscape, in how many countries if it's global? What is their experience? And you need to really understand that. Well, I work with a couple big clients. That doesn't tell me much. What's the demographic? How many invoices are you processing? Contracts, on and on and on. So make sure you know the scope of their experience. Vertical market category experience. If you are a healthcare, there are certain rules and regulations within healthcare, HIPAA-driven, that you must comply with, and so must your TEM. If you're higher ed, if you're whatever your vertical is that you're in, your market, understand others within the market that they're working with, just not because it's different other than from a standpoint of laws, rules, regulations. Phone bills are phone bills are phone bills. So if I'm paying phone bills and I'm a government or I'm a healthcare, I still have phone bills. But the security and the policies and the procedural constraints are what you really need to understand. Global expertise. I don't know how many are on the phone today that are going global with TEM. The unfortunate part is many people say we're going to go global and don't always know what that means. To manage expenses globally, you must be able to manage movement. So if you can't build processes, then managing expense is nothing more than, I mean, in my mind, telephone bills are nothing more than a representation of what's already happened. So if all I'm doing is focusing on the bill, I'm not doing anything strategically to move the company. So from a global standpoint, if you're going to do that, what's their expertise? Cheryl came abroad. She's been abroad for 20 years. And so she understands the global market in ways that I can never. Things you would have to say about the global piece?
Right. With global, the things to ask your vendor, have they worked with multi-level tax tiers? Do they know what inclusive and exclusive taxes are? What about all of the data protection laws? There are some countries that don't let data out, so you have to identify it going out and re-identify it coming back in. Tax laws on the way services are paid. You may have a hub in Hong Kong with PCCW who may be paying bills for 30 countries or 20 countries who may be subbing a number of other vendors, and the taxation doesn't show up, but the taxation has to be paid to the country where the service is being provided. There's lots and lots of pitfalls. Make sure your vendor knows how to do it, also knows that EDI feeds are customized outside the United States. If you tell them what you want, chances are you're going to get it from all the large vendors. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of things to know. If your vendor gives you a blank stare on those questions, you need to find someone else to help you with global.
Yep. From an implementation standpoint, I mean, the approach, you want to understand their approach. How do you establish my inventory? What are you going to do with my contracts, my terms, my rates, all my T's and C's, all those things. Validation, line verification. I want to understand completely how you are going to implement my environment, especially going back to my nirvana, inventory, optimization, processes, and measuring performance. If you've not done any of those things, what they're going to do for you in implementation becomes crucial. Or simply you're dumping dirty data from the vendor into software and the results are not going to be as beneficial as you would have liked. Data integrity processes, initial and ongoing. That's an Achilles heel to TEM, is data integrity. The quality both coming from the vendor as well as internally from you. So how are we going to get that data stream straightforward? How are we going to get that data stream consistent so the good information is going in? Business analytics, reporting structure, and ease of use. This is something I think people miss the boat on many times in TEM. They get a TEM with the idea of processing invoices and keeping track of costs and chargeback. You should be able to get a great number of business analytics out of the back of your TEM technology that are going to enable you to show the business how you're performing. You should be able to understand what is your fixed cost per employee across the board, and if you were able to modify contracts and do things, how did you affect that? Did you reduce the cost per employee from 200 to 125? Those are the things that are advantageous for the telecom and IT professionals because it enables you to support why you're there. It enables you to support that you're helping drive business results. Chargeback controls. What do you want to charge back to? What's the granularity of it? And what are you going to do with it? Is there a process to manage to it? Those are things that you want to understand how they do chargebacks and how that works. Ability to customize and the costs, big issue in TEM. Either the trust me, I'll take care of you handshake or an expectation and assumption. You need to know what their ability to customize technology to meet your needs are and what the costs associated with it. I cannot tell you how many times we hear scope creep and everything I want to do that they said that we either could or would become $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 ad. That's a big problem in this space. Is I had an expectation I was going to get X, I need Y, and it's going to cost me a lot to do it, especially when you've gone to the board or you've gone to the financial owners, the stakeholders, the CFO, and said, hey, I need $50,000, and now you got to go back and say I need 5 here and 4 here and 3 here. So understand their ability to customize, number one. Number two, what are the costs associated to you?
And one question came in from Elizabeth Cunicelli. I hope I pronounced your name right, Elizabeth. On EDI feeds, again, a customization. Can you get an EDI and paper invoice? Now, in most cases outside of the U.S., the answer is yes, but you get one from the vendor. If you want another type, they usually can provide it for a fee.
Yeah.
And that's not a TEM statement. That is a service provider statement. So in most large companies, the smaller ones maybe not, the smaller service providers, but the large ones can provide both, but it is double work, so they will only provide one as part of the service and you'll pay for the other one.
Right. And the EDI feeds, if you're getting any electronic media today, CD, web download, any of those things, all can be used by a TEM provider. So EDI is maybe a course that they would like to have, but not necessarily an absolute. Updates. How often, who pays, and are they optional? Again, this is one of those dirty little secrets. Updates are expected and assumed. Don't do that. You need to know how often they're going to have them and who's going to pay for them. In 90% of the situations, you will be paying for the update. If you're working through someone else, I have some situations where there's systems integrators that provide software or provide TEM services. Maybe the TEM provider will say, I'll do the upgrade, but because you work with the SI, there's a cost to them to get it done because they're hosting it in their environment. So you just need to understand updates, how it applies, and who's going to pay for it. And then who owns the data. This has been a big problem. In fact, we ran into this recently with a client that they didn't realize that they didn't own their data. Information that was in the system belonged to the provider. When they cut down the service, they basically kept and retained that information, and then the client has to go through all of the push-ups to get the information flowing back to them, which I will tell you today on a good day is a 3 to 5 month process by the time you get readdressed and things to that effect done. So these are things you need to understand about the vendor. And I would applaud all of you if you're asking these questions of your next or prospective TEM provider.
But then on the other hand, here's some of the leading indicators of trouble ahead, Scott. What are they?
Well, no initial services inventory. Guess what? How would that pop up? I didn't have good visibility of my services and I expected it. So this is, if you don't have one and you've deployed TEM, you're probably finding that it's creating some issues. Limited access to information, bills, contracts, letters of authorization. Seeing a client right now that the LOAs have taken 5 months to get done, get through legal. Vendors can't move without LOAs. Your TEM provider can't move without LOAs. So if there are big hurdles and milestones in that particular mode, you need to be addressing them and understand that they exist. But limited access to information, that's what creates the 8 months to steady state, because people didn't have it available. They didn't know they were going to need to go get it, and they didn't realize it was their responsibility.
And especially outside the country, please, please, please make sure you know who your account manager is for that service provider, that you have the letter of authorization already in hand, that you have the correct name of your company. There are so many reasons and ways that something incorporated rather than corporation, LLC instead of Inc., all of those will stop data in its tracks. So make sure you have the exact names, you know your contact in that service provider. We've spent months just trying to find the right person to talk to.
Right, and that's very important, because I mean, as you've merged and acquired, you may have ABC Motors, but then you may have Denny's Motors and Johnny's. Those all have to be relevant and present on LOAs, or you can't get information. The next two kind of go together: just get it done approach and poor communication or direction from the vendor. This let's do it all in one time, especially global, is ridiculous. Even doing fixed and mobile at the same time. Book of Hoyle is do fixed first and then mobile. But never should you have a one-size-fits-all, we'll get it all done at the same time. Even in a North American rollout, there should be a stepping stone and milestones for achievement. Biggest facilities to small, corporate regions, parts, whatever you want to do, but there should be a plan, and it shouldn't be we're just going to get it dumped and it'll all be done in 60 days. That's the quickest road to disaster that I can tell you. Failure to isolate business owners, get buy-in, and assign responsibility. We see this all the time. We see that many times TEM is sold into the financial people in the organization. This is going to save you money, and then they give it to you IT and telecom professionals on the call today to implement. That creates a bit of a problem. Who are the business owners in the units? Who have responsibility for the budgeting, for the financing, for the management of telecommunications, and involving them in the initiative, not just expecting it. We have an organization now that I would say, Cheryl, a third to 2/3 knew what was going on, the others don't.
Absolutely.
And there's pushback, and that occurs. And then the buy-in and signing responsibility. There need to be expectations, assignments of responsibility, and accountability to it, or it will have problems along the way. Unresolved process inconsistencies, or lack thereof.
It's kind of a dead horse, but we have to keep beating it because that is one of the biggest problems.
I can't tell you how many times that there's an expectation of, if I need it, I'll just call Ashley and she'll get it. It needs to be a defined process with an accountability for it getting done and measurement of performance. Just like when we talk about audits. You know what? 80% of what you're presented in an audit situation is not savings, it's recovery. And it's recovery because it was a process breakdown that enabled it to happen. Quick example. How many of you ever found disconnects on your phone bills that you're still paying for? That's a process issue. That's not a savings in any way, shape, or form. What it's telling you is you disconnected the line, but there wasn't a process to follow up 2 to 3 billing cycles or somebody to own it to make sure it came off. So it's a recovery. It's not a savings. 3 lines from the same carrier billing differently. When you get to the root cause of the problem, you realize that multiple people do the ads and moves and don't follow the same process. So I can't stress enough processes.
And then there's global requirements without the planning and experience. And, we've talked about that. My point here would be just make sure that someone on that team knows the providers, knows what they do, knows the requirements, understands how to work outside the United States. It is extremely complex. And if you don't have a vendor who knows how to do that or an advisor who knows how to do that, it won't be successful and it will be extremely painful. I think also the financially driven initiative not supported by technology and business leaders kind of adds on to the last one, Scott, because it's really about telecommunications is a technology that your business depends upon. You know, it's not the phone on the desk. Think of your company without communications today. It stops, right? It just stops. So building that business case, it's not just about savings. It may be about reinvestment. It may be about migrating to a more mobile environment. There's lots of reasons to do TEM, but they should be about what is your business trying to do and how can telecommunications support that?
What's the outcome I'm trying to achieve? I mean, a CEO in a company doesn't buy a product, he buys an outcome. So what's the outcome you're trying to achieve? And the financially driven initiative, it's great, but if it doesn't align, again, people, process, and tools. If the people and the processes and the tools don't align, then the opportunity for financial gain is going to be limited. And quite frankly, the last question, I mean, required to produce savings year over year. Is that really a good thing? And I know there's probably a lot of people shaking their head that you're charged with cutting 10 to 20% a year out of the telecommunications and IT budget. That means in 5 years it should be free. So the reality of it is we have to look at it in far different ways, far more strategically than tactically. And billing is the byproduct of your actions. So if you follow a process and develop one, I promise every one of you today, the billing will get better by default. You save money by defining and honing processes. If you're going to throw a TEM in the middle, your processes are going to have to align with it, or it's not going to be effective. Okay, so we're going to give you, we've got about 3 or 4 more slides left as we're kind of wrapping up the last 10 minutes. So avoiding disaster ahead. These are things to think about. These are unique ways in which you can work to help to avoid as much disaster as possible. First, requesting information, RFIs versus RFPs. RFIs are really develop the business case and the assumptions. Put the RFI out, play with the space, get them to respond, talk to them. I will always suggest to you as the end users, never throw one of these to the streets and not have the willingness to talk to those that are going to give you back information or numbers. I can't tell you how much frustration I hear from TEM providers that say, I got this piece of paper, it's 30 pages, and they're asking me to respond, but they won't talk to me. That's a failure and it's a big mistake. You need to talk. Collaboration is important. So the RFI allows you to validate the business case for what you're looking for, and then the RFP allows you to refine it and really more structure the selection process. I do an RFI to 5. I shouldn't never do an RFP to more than 3, period. So I can refine my structure. I can refine my selection process. Know which services match your business requirements. You want outsourced, you want managed services, you want technology only, you want a combination thereof. I think a lot of people don't understand some of the availability. I mean, you can get an installed technology, you own it, you run it, you do it. I can get hosted. I can get host and load, which is they just dump my information on a monthly basis and I manage it. So understand what is the requirements of the business. What are you looking to achieve?
And a lot of times you really need to ask as you work with your business leaders, your business unit or agency leaders, what is your core competency? I know that's an old phrase, but if technology is not what your business does, why do you want to be in it? Because you have to have good people, you have to train them, you have to keep them motivated. So make sure you're making these decisions on your business needs rather than any other, like, oh, we'd like to own it because we want to know what's happening. Well, you will still know what's happening if you have a SaaS or an outsourced, but those resources that are very fragile in many cases right now can be applied to other things for business.
Absolutely. And I mean, clearly understanding the effort required in the project, setting the expectations with the internal groups, externally, internally, key. Very, very important to understand the effort that's going to be required, who's going to own the effort, who's going to do the work, and how it's going to get done. Everybody's saying this is going to be great, and nobody willing to put in the effort is going to create a problem. So very, very important. Measuring deployment to steady state achievement against the business case and the expectations as well as the ROI. When you went into it, you went into it for a reason. Save money, save time, save effort, have reporting. Did you get that? And measuring deployment to steady state. I can't tell you how important it is in contract SLAs and T's and C's on these TEM initiatives to set achievement milestones. Month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, month 5. Have a project plan, have a milestone for achievement in that plan, and it needs to be agreed to and signed off by your vendor. If it's not in print, it doesn't exist, and that's very, very important in this space. Develop and use metrics measuring performance improvement. Ensure reporting is targeted and meaningful to the user group. here's the 4 keys: executives, operations, finance, and the business unit. You're responsible to report to these different groups. What are the reports that they want to see? High level, mid-level, lower level, tactical, strategic. You need to determine what the reporting structure is, what they want to see, and the capabilities of the technology to provide that, so that it's not something you've got to massage out, pull 50 reams of information out of the technology, massage it in a different way to provide it and present it. That's part of the customization. That's part of the development, is to determine when you're discussing this with them, what report capabilities do they have, what's their ability to customize to make it fit your organization.
And also we run into a lot of clients who say, we just spent weeks doing this wonderful report and it has all this information and no one will read it. Well, the reason no one reads it is because you think it's a great report because it shows what you do and how you do it, but the executive wants to know the trends. The finance wants to know, are we on target for forecasting? It could be 2 things that they want to look at, so you really need to align those reports on not to show all the great things we do, but what does the executive, in the 3 seconds they have, is it going to grab their attention and say, okay, I know they're on target. So it really is a tool for you to say we're on target and we're not, and if we're not, what do we need to do to fix it?
Exactly. And measuring success beyond cost savings. I mean, audits basically identify what went wrong in the past. So let's think about the futuristic component of this. Let's think about the business, the strategy, moving the company forward, not only managing our costs, but enabling us to use this technology to show how we are performing. Aligning your resources and processes to the TEM tool. Again, I don't want to be a broken record, but people, processes, and tools. Align those 3 things and you have a far more successful engagement with your TEM provider. If you're not having one today, you might look at one of those 3 pieces as the component.
Then we have identifying success criteria, and we have a question from Philip that says, can we detail the best outcomes that can most realistically be achieved through a TEM provider? Now I have a couple high levels and then we'll go into this, but really you want to make sure that you are paying your accounts or provisioning accurately. You want the flexibility to add, to change, to disconnect, that when you shut down a facility, you know those things are going to be shut down because your TEM provider is going to help you. Also, you want to make sure that if you have early pay discounts, those are being met, that if you don't have any late payment charges. Those are the kinds of very specific measures that show success. But on a broader scale, we're really looking at this slide and identifying the success criteria, Scott.
The thing I'll bring up, too, just to what Cheryl said about EPDs or early pay discounts, is that early pay discounts, it's a new niche for the vendors. It's something they're presenting to the bigger clients, 2% discount if it's paid within 10 days. If you're going to deploy TEM in the middle of this, you need to be able to know that they can accommodate it. You need to know how they batch. You need to know when they put the batch in. A lot of things need to come into that, and we can talk about that offline if you have more questions. So identifying success. So this is how I'm going to identify success in my engagement. Executive buy-in and support is crucial. Get it before you start. From top to bottom, get the support for this initiative. This is to manage the finances of our organization. We're going to tie our people and our processes to this, and so we're going to be able to then also streamline our workflow, optimize our environment over time. TEM technology is not a solution but a tool, and it needs to be integrated across the enterprise, processes and systems. The interdependencies, the management of TEM coming into it, you need to be able to basically open the pagoda. If you're going to bring in a TEM provider, they need to know the systems, SAP, the HR, whatever it is, they need to understand the systems, how it needs to align with those systems, how those people operate within those departments so that you can have complete alignment. There are lots of points of breakage that can create a problem. You want to isolate as many as possible up front and asking about that particular vendor's expertise, their client base. Your vertical is going to give you some of the information you need. Internal alignment between resources, processes, and tools. I'm not going to harp on it. I said it enough. It's very important. Measuring is one key to success. You can't manage what you cannot measure. My favorite statement. If you don't have visibility to services, what do you think just looking at the billing is going to do? Little if any. You're simply going to be paying and processing invoices, and I can't tell you, unfortunately, how many organizations I deal with on an annual basis that's what they're doing. They're reporting costs and reporting audit savings. 80% of it isn't savings. So let's try to change the street fight and get it into something that's more strategic.
And then there's continuous improvement life cycle. I know that sounds like a very complex quality program, but it really is important to success of any software tool. You need to continuously maintain the data, validate that you're paying the correct thing, make sure that any contractual changes are put into the business rules of your TEM. So having someone who understands that at the very beginning and who sets up that continuous improvement lifecycle plan for you is essential. And most corporations have a Six Sigma or someone that can help you do that.
Right. And if you're going to be a Six Sigma shop or an IDLE shop, then tie it to communications. It's unfortunate
Absolutely.
how many people work so hard to get their ISO certifications and recertification and everything else, but don't apply it to telecom. So have clear vision of the future state. Where do I want to get to and why am I deploying it? Build a framework that provides predictable, sustainable outcomes. If you can't predict it, if you can't sustain it, then why are we doing it to begin with? We're going to flop on real quickly. We're going to show you something to think about.
So what we've talked about is we have the model, the framework, where we talk to and integrate the 4 stakeholder groups with 7 business disciplines and 16 activities. And you'll get these charts. But as you're looking at TEM and thinking about the telecommunications environment management, look at all of these and ask yourself if you are approaching it in this holistic way and if you are addressing the needs of each of these groups or activities.
And the other thing I would say from the model, this is my favorite. I mean, the Efficiency First framework is something we've built. We're patenting it. But at the end of the day, the question I would say for you is this. When I think that I've got a fully managed environment, I'm streamlining my workflow, my processes are working, in the disciplines and the activities, how many of them currently today do you have a process for, it's defined, and you're measuring performance in? And so when you start to look at these and you start to think about how much control I really have, it opens up an opportunity for you to look into different areas. If you think about the disciplines and the activities, they all roll up. So we can have further chats about this across the board, but just giving you an idea.
So we have 35 seconds, Scott, so I think we'll go through these. You'll get the charts about their Efficiency First. It's our little ad. So if you want to go to the last one, you have Scott's email address and my email address. There were a couple questions that were not answered that are really more discussions. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we really appreciate all of you attending this session today.
Yeah, if there's anything we can do, I mean, we get the good fortune to talk to great people like you every day that have frustrations. This is my 22nd year in telecommunications. I'm very passionate. Cheryl and I, you'll find, we love what we do. We're very passionate about the space. We're here to help, and we're here to happy to take your questions. So reach out to us, let us know, and we can talk about it offline. But all the best to you in your TEM initiatives. It doesn't come without stress and frustration, but at the end of the day, it can certainly impact your company. So have a great day and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.